Cārvāka, also known as Cārvāka, is a system of Indian philosophy that assumes various forms of materialism, philosophical skepticism and religious indifference. Cārvāka is classified as a heterodox Hindu Nāstika system. It is characterized as a materialistic and atheistic school of thought. While this branch of Indian philosophy is today not considered to be part of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy, some describe it as an atheistic or materialistic philosophical movement within Hinduism. Cārvāka emerged as an alternative to the orthodox Hindu Nāstika schools, as well as a philosophical predecessor to subsequent or contemporaneous Nāstika philosophy such as Cārvāka, Jainism, and Buddhism, the latter two later spinning off into what may be described today as separate religions, in the classical period of Indian philosophy. As opposed to other schools, the first principle of Cārvāka philosophy was the rejection of inference as a means to establish metaphysical truths. Name. Etymologically, Cārvāka means agreeable speech, or sweet talk or cru. Agreeable, pleasant or sweet and vk speech, and yata signifies prevalence in the local world and yata prevalent. The name Yata can be traced to Kautilya's Arthashastra, which refers to 3 Nvkas, logical philosophies, yoga, samkhya, and Yata. However, Yata in Arthashastra does not stand for materialism, because the Arthashastra refers to Yata as a part of Vedic lore. Yata here probably refers to logic or science of debate, disputatio, criticism, and not to the materialist doctrine. Similarly, Sasanidhi and Buddhayasa in the 5th century connect the Yata with the Vedantas, sophists. It is only from about the 6th century that the term Yata was restricted to the school of the materialists or Lokitikas. The name Cārvāka was first used in the 7th century by the philosopher Brandara, who referred to his fellow materialists as the Cārvākas, and it was used by the 8th century philosophers Kamalala and Haribhadra. Adi Shankara, on the other hand, always used Yata, not Cārvāka. By the 8th century, the term Cārvāka, Yata, and Birhaspati were used interchangeably to signify materialism. Origin. The earliest documented materialist in India is Ajita Kambali, a senior contemporary of the Buddha, 6th/5th century BCE. The basic tenets of Cārvāka philosophy, of no soul and existence of 4, not 5, elements, were probably inspired from him. Although materialist schools existed before Cārvāka, it was the only school which systematized materialist philosophy by setting them down in the form of aphorisms in the 6th century. There was a base text, a collection stras, or aphorisms, and several commentaries were written to explicate the aphorisms. E. W. Hopkins, in his The Ethics of India, 1924, claims that Cārvāka philosophy was contemporaneous to Jainism and Buddhism, mentioning the old Cārvāka, or materialist of the 6th century BC. Rhys Davids assumes that Yata in ca 500 BC came to mean skepticism in general without yet being organized as a philosophical school, and that the name of a villain in the epic Mahabharata, Cārvāka, was attached to the position in order to disparage it. The earliest positive statement of skepticism is preserved from the epic period, in the Ramayana, Ayodhya-kanda, chapter 108, where Jabali tries to persuade Rama to accept the kingdom by using Nāstika arguments, but Rama then refutes him in chapter 109. Oh, the highly wise arrive at a conclusion, therefore, that there is nothing beyond this universe. Give precedence to that which meets the eye, and turn your back on what is beyond our knowledge. 2.108.17. The Cārvāka school thus appears to have gradually grown out of generic skepticism in the Mauryan period, but its existence as an organized body cannot be ascertained for times predating the 6th century. The Brihaspatya Sutras were likely also composed in Mauryan times, predating 150 BC, based on a reference in the Manabhasaya of Patanjali, 7.3.45. Cārvāka was a living philosophy up to the 12th century AD, after which this system seems to have disappeared without leaving any trace. The reason for this sudden disappearance is not known. Earliest descriptions. Brihaspati is sometimes referred to as the founder of Cārvāka or Lokyata philosophy. The earliest direct quote from Brihaspati's lost writings is found in the text Sarvasiddhantisamgraha, which is sometimes controversially attributed to Adi Shankara. In the Sarvasiddhantisamgraha, the author quotes Brihaspati as follows. Chastity and other such ordinances are laid down by clever weaklings. Gifts of gold and land, the pleasure of invitations to dinner, are devised by indigent people with stomachs lean with hunger. The building of temples, houses for water supply, tanks, wells, resting places, and the like, please only travelers, not others. The Agnihotra ritual, the 3 Vedas, the triple staff, the ash smearing, are the ways of gaining a livelihood for those who are lacking in intellect and energy. The wise should enjoy the pleasures of this world through the more appropriate available means of agriculture, tending cattle, trade, political administration, etc. Philosophy. Part of a series on atheism. Types and concepts. Types: implicit and explicit, negative and positive. The Cārvāka school of philosophy had a variety of atheistic and materialistic beliefs. They held perception to be the only valid source of knowledge. Epistemology. In syllogism, the middle term, which is found in both the subject, minor term, and is invariably connected with the predicate, major term, is seen as the cause of knowledge. This invariable connection between middle term and predicate is unconditional and causes inference not by virtue of its existence, like the existence of the eye is the cause of perception, but by virtue of its being known. To the Cārvākas there were no reliable means by which this connection could be known, and therefore the efficacy of inference as a means of knowledge could not be established. To prove that inference was not a reliable means of knowledge, Cārvākas examined and refuted each of the various means of knowing the connection between the middle term and the predicate individually. External perception, or perception which involves the use of the senses, could not be the required means, because although it is possible that the actual contact of the senses and the object could produce the knowledge of the particular object, there can never be such contact in the case of the past or the future. Therefore, if external perception were the means on knowing the connection, then inference related to objects of the past and future could not happen. Internal perception, or perception which involves the mind, could not be the required means, either, because one cannot establish that the mind has any power to act independently towards an external object, and is thought to be dependent on the external senses. Nor could inference be the means, since if inference were the proof of inference, one would also require another inference to establish this inference, and so on, leading to the fallacy of an ad infinitum regression. Nor could testimony be the means, since testimony can be classified as a type of inference. Moreover, there is no reason for one to believe the word of another. Besides, if testimony were to be accepted as the only means of the knowledge of the invariable connection between middle term and predicate, then in the case of a man to whom the fact of the connection had not been pointed out by another person, there could be no inference. Comparison, upamana, could also be rejected as the means of the knowledge of the connection, since the objective of using upamana is to establish a different kind of knowledge than is being sought here, the relation of a name to something so named. Absence of a condition, upati, which is given as the definition of an invariable connection, to restrict to general a middle term, could itself not be used to establish inference, because it is impossible to establish that all conditions required to restrict the middle term are known without recourse to inference, and inference, as has been proven earlier, cannot establish itself. Metaphysics. Since none of the means of knowing were found to be worthy to establish the invariable connection between middle term and predicate, Cārvākas concluded that the inference could not be used to ascertain metaphysical truths. Thus, to Cārvāka is the step which the mind takes from the knowledge of something to infer the knowledge of something else could be accounted for by its being based on a former perception, or by its being an error. Cases where inference was justified by the result were seen only to be mere coincidences. Therefore, Cārvāka denied metaphysical concepts, like reincarnation, extracorporeal soul, efficacy of religious rites, other worlds, heaven and hell, fate, and accumulation of merit or demerit through the performance of certain actions. Cārvāka also rejected the use of supernatural causes to describe natural phenomena. To them all natural phenomena was produced spontaneously from the inherent nature of things. The fire is hot, the water cold, refreshing cool the breeze of morn, by whom came this variety? From their own nature was it born. Consciousness and afterlife. Cārvāka thought that body was formed out of 4 elements, instead of 5, and that consciousness was an outcome of the mixture of these elements. Therefore, Cārvāka did not believe in an afterlife. To them, all attributes that represented a person, such as thinness, fatness, etc., resided in the body. To support the proposition of non-existence of any soul or consciousness in the afterlife, Cārvāka often quoted from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Springing forth from these elements itself, solid knowledge is destroyed. When they are destroyed after death, no intelligence remains. Cārvāka believed that there was nothing wrong with sensual pleasure. Since it is impossible to have pleasure without pain, Cārvāka thought that wisdom lay in enjoying pleasure and avoiding pain as far as possible. Unlike many of the Indian philosophies of the time, Cārvāka did not believe in austerities, or rejecting pleasure out of fear of pain, and held such reasoning to be foolish. The berries of paddy, rich with the finest white grains, what man, seeking his true interest, would fling away because covered with husk and dust? Religion. Cārvāka rejected religious conceptions like afterlife, reincarnation, religious rites, etc. They were extremely critical of the Vedas, and thought that Vedas suffered from 3 faults: untruth, self-contradiction, and tautology. To them, Vedas were just incoherent rhapsodies. They also held the belief that such texts were invented and made up by men, and had no divine authority. The Agnihotra, the 3 Vedas, the ascetics' 3 staves, and smearing oneself with ashes, were made by nature, as the livelihood of those destitute of knowledge and manliness. Works. No independent works on Cārvāka philosophy can be found except for a few stras composed by Brihaspati. The 8th century Tattvapalavasima of J.R.I. Bhatt, ca. 8th century, is often cited as the only extant authentic Cārvāka text, but which also shows Madhyamaka influence. Shatdarshan Samuche and Sarvadaranasagраha of Vidyaranya are a few other works which elucidate Cārvāka thought. One of the most important references to the Cārvāka philosophy is the Sarvadaranasagраha. Etymologically, a philosophy collection, a famous work of 14th century Advaita Vedanta philosopher Metaphysics from South India, which starts with a chapter on the Cārvāka system. After invoking, in the prologue of the book, the Hindu god Shiva and Vishnu, by whom the earth and rest were produced, Vidyaravaya asks, in the first chapter, but how can we attribute to the divine being the giving of supreme felicity, when such a notion has been utterly abolished by Cārvāka, the Christian of the atheistic school, the follower of the doctrine of Brihaspati? The efforts of Cārvāka are indeed hard to be eradicated, for the majority of living beings hold by the current refrain, while life is yours, live joyously, none can escape death's searching eye. When once this frame of ours they burn, how shall it e'er again return? Ain-i-Akbari, written by Abul Fazl, the famous historian of Akbar's court, mentions a symposium of philosophers of all faiths held in 1578, at Akbar's insistence. Some of the beliefs of Cārvāka are recorded from this symposium, in which some Cārvāka philosophers are said to have participated. Sanskrit poems and plays like the Nyaya Chakarita, Prabhata Kandradaya, Gamadambara, Vidvanmo.rgi, and Kadambar contain representations of the Cārvāka thought. However, the authors of these works were thoroughly opposed to materialism, and tried to portray the Cārvāka in unfavorable light. Therefore, their works should only be accepted critically. Loss of original works. There was no continuity in the Cārvāka tradition after the 12th century. Whatever is written on Cārvāka post this is based on second-hand knowledge, learned from preceptors to disciples, and no independent works on Cārvāka philosophy can be found. Chatterjee and Datta explain that our understanding of Cārvāka philosophy is fragmentary, based largely on criticism of its ideas by other schools, and that it is not a living tradition. Though materialism in some form or other has always been present in India, and occasional references are found in the Vedas, the Buddhistic literature, the epics, as well as in the later philosophical works, we do not find any systematic work on materialism, nor any organized school of followers as the other philosophical schools possess. But almost every work of the other school states, for refutation, the materialistic views. Our knowledge of Indian materialism is chiefly based on these. Representation of Cārvāka and Nāstika, Buddhist, and Jain literature. Buddhists, Jains, Advaita Vedantins, and Nyaya philosophers considered the Cārvāka as one of their opponents, and tried to refute their views. These refutations are sources of Cārvāka philosophy, since they continue to be made even after all the authentic Cārvāka/Lokyata texts had been lost. However, the representation of the Cārvāka thought in these works is not always firmly grounded in first-hand knowledge of Cārvāka texts, and should be viewed critically. Though Cārvāka accepted direct perception as the surest method to prove the truth of anything, they might also have accepted a limited usage of inference. The perception that Cārvāka had a rigid stance against the application of inference might have been a result of caricaturing of their arguments by their opponents. Debaprasad Chattopadhyaya quotes S. N. Dasgupta. Purandara, a Lokyata philosopher, admits the usefulness of inference in determining the nature of all worldly things where perceptual experience is available, but inference cannot be employed for establishing any dogma regarding the transcendental world, or life after death, or the law of karma, which cannot be available to ordinary perceptual experience. Likewise, the charge of hedonism against Cārvāka might have been exaggerated. Countering the argument that the Cārvāka opposed all that was good in the Vedic tradition, Dalrymple says, it may be said from the available material that Cārvāka hold truth, integrity, consistency, and freedom of thought in the highest esteem.